Boys and girls, your attention, please. Presenting a new exciting radio program.
And now, here's Warren Marshall with the news.
Presenting the amazing interplanetary adventures of Flash Gordon.
Story, ask us anything about comic history. I'm Kelly Guentner.
And I'm Hollis Thompson.
And I always throw it to you without any warning. I'm sorry.
No, totally cool. I have to be prepared for anything in my line of work. So there you go.
Yes, you do. So we finished off the first season, 1 year of Comic Story at the end of last year. And we're opening the forum to all of you to ask whatever questions you want. But let's do a little rewind. Hollis, what is your favorite thing that we covered this year? Do you have a favorite?
Wow. That's a hard question. Yeah, because there are so many cool topics that we've talked about. Oh. I mean, I think one of the coolest episodes to just record was the one where we got to interview Wonder Woman.
Yes. Shannon Farnan. Yes. Wonder Woman herself. So she played Wonder Woman on the Super Friends animated show, which makes her the first person to play Wonder Woman in any capacity.
Yeah.
She joined us as we talked about Wonder Woman and feminism of the 1960s, or feminism of the 1960s and 1970s. And we got to talk about how she felt about playing Wonder Woman at that point in time. Was really cool. You all should go and look it up. We had some audio issues, so I had to do a lot of work behind the scenes to stitch it together.
That's kind of the story of your life when it comes to this show, Kelly, is I had to do a lot of stuff behind the scenes to stitch it together, which I appreciate immensely. I know that you have to edit me all the time with the crazy things I say. You've got to just cut through all the insanity and get to the logic.
You're really not that bad at it. No, this was also really a failing on our studio's part, that it just was not playing nicely, and we made it work like on Project Runway, but I had to do a lot on the back end to make it audible, and it still didn't sound great, but it sounded pretty good compared to what it would have sounded like. So bear with us when you listen to the episode, but it's worth it because Shannon Farnan is always so well spoken, and she's just incredible. Like, I'm honored to have been able to chat with her in this capacity multiple times.
It was surreal because at one point at the beginning, she used her Wonder Woman voice, and to hear Wonder Woman say my name was a pretty surreal moment. I have to say. That
was pretty cool. And when she goes into that Wonder Woman voice, it is just chills. It's like, because she can just call it, and she is Wonder Woman.
There you go.
So Crayley has a good question. What comes to mind first when you think of the strangest trend in comic books?
There's so many bizarre comic book trends that question is very hard to answer for me. I think that in like the most objective sense, I think that the woman in refrigerators trend is the most bizarre and the most harmful, definitely, overall trend in comic books. And we did an episode on that.
We did. And that was definitely one of my favorites. I mean, I feel like they're all my favorites, but that one was a really good one. I'm going to go a little lighter, and we talked about why the Silver Age was the way it was. And one of my favorite trends was the super dickery of the Silver Age and how out there Superman was. So Superman in most incarnations is kind and good. And in the Silver Age, he was just a dick. You look up those panels, and so there was Superman's girlfriend Lois Lane and Superman's pal Jimmy Olsen, those side titles, and all of them are just bonkers scenarios where Superman is being awful to the two of the most important people in his life.
Well, supposedly. I mean, Lois, as I explained, Lois becomes, in the Silver Age, she was never intended to be this way in the Golden Age. But in the Silver Age, she just becomes this really, really sad character who is obsessed with Superman. And he obviously has no interest in her romantically. But she keeps trying. Like, the plot of almost every issue of Superman's girlfriend, Lois Lane, is Lois attempting to blackmail, trap, or trick Superman into marrying her. And it's just really sad if you think about it.
Oh, we don't talk about Super Horse, nah. This is Crayley saying, I think one of the strangest things that happen in the Super family is stuff with Kara and her Super Horse. We are going to talk about it right now. For those who don't know, in the 60s again, Silver Age, Kara was dating her horse. Not while he was in horse form. And she didn't know it was her horse. So she had Comet the super horse who had wings. He was actually a Pegasus. And Comet was, I guess, a werehorse or something because he could change into a man.
Well, the complicated backstory of Comet is that he began life as a centaur. There we go. A centaur. The half man, half horse. That's how he began his life. And then through a tragic twist of events, he ended up being transformed into a full horse, hence where he normally comes from. But he has telepathy is his powers, hence why he can still communicate with people like Kara. So, yes, they did a story where he transformed into a human and dated Kara. But to me, the more bananas story was actually before that. They had a storyline where Kara got turned into a horse and then dated Comet while they were both in horse form.
Oh my gosh.
Which is one of the most bananas things that they did. I just got done lecturing on that this week. So my
on the
students
Super Horse?
are aware. On Super Horse, yeah.
And this is one of your students.
It is.
This is a great question. So extra credit.
Hey, Kelsey. It is actually extra credit, yes. Hey, Kelsey, I appreciate you showing up. This is an interesting one. I'll start, but I really do want to hear what Kelly has to say. Because I will admit, Kelly is a much bigger Superman fan than I am. So Kelly has probably a lot more passion to say about this topic. But before Superman, okay. It is an active debate whether or not Superman was technically the first superhero, because it kind of depends on how you define a superhero. Because if you define a superhero as a hero with superhuman powers, well, that goes back to mythology and all of that kind of stuff. And that, to the beginning, Gilgamesh, right? You can argue is a superhero if that's what you mean. But if what you mean by a superhero is a guy or a gal who has powers and wears a costume and has a secret identity that they use to fight crime in a modern city, then it is a safe contender that Superman is the first superhero, if that's how you define superhero. And for that reason alone, Superman completely changed comic book history. Because up until then, comic books weren't really centered around any one specific type of genre. But Action Comics #1, Superman's first appearance, was at that time the highest selling comic book ever. And then all of a sudden, everyone wanted their own Superman in the comic book world. And that's what created the superhero boom to begin with.
Yeah, very true. So how do we think Superman redefined the idea of a hero in 1938? So Superman, again, like you said, he's not the very first superhero, but he came onto the scene and made huge waves and pretty much gave us that archetype of what an American superhero looks like. The primary colors, the cape, the strong moral code. Though I will say, for anyone who hasn't read original Superman, he's got a bit more of an edge in those early books. He is okay with intimidating gangsters by dropping them from tall buildings and then catching them before they hit the ground to intimidate them. And he's not going after supervillains. He's going after corrupt politicians, and he's going after, bankers who are basically cheating people out of their money, and
a wife beater.
And a wife beater.
Comic. Yeah. He goes in and he beats the crap out of a guy who was beating up on his wife, which I actually find absolutely hilarious. So, yeah, very different. Not a Boy Scout yet in the beginning.
And he saves Lois from some men who are just harassing her at a dance hall.
Yes, that too. Yep, exactly.
And as Eli says, what we were talking about with Kara and the super horse, it's tame compared to super stories. He could be wrong. Yeah.
No comment.
And then we have Stardust, who may as well be a precursor to Injustice Superman or even Homelander, which is absolutely true. Like, people think, anyone who thinks Homelander is something new, no. From very early on, they were flipping the script on Superman and going, okay, well, this is the archetype. How can we flip this archetype on his head? Because everyone loves a twisted archetype. You're always going to get
Although I will
writers.
say,
oh, go ahead.
We have had so many evil Superman stories by this point that I am okay with no one ever doing another one at this point. That one, they have done that one to death, in my opinion. There are good ones, don't get me wrong. Like, I think Injustice is a really interesting take because it doesn't really... I would argue that the Injustice storyline is not Superman being evil just because, what would it be like if Superman was evil? But it really gives you a logical progression of how Superman would become like the Superman we all know, like the good person, how he could become somebody who tries to take over the world, basically. But now I'm done.
The Injustice stories are wild to me because it's a video game that's based on how do we get it. It's basically Street Fighter or Mortal Kombat in the DC world, and they just enlisted like super talented comic creators to make tie-in comics. They didn't need to be good.
No, but they were. And that's the crazy thing.
Like, the lore for it is really good. And I also am tired of evil Superman, but that one, it does resonate. It's good. So clearly asked a good question. How do we feel about stories like Red Sun, which are different from evil Superman, but very different from Superman? I love them when they actually show that natural character progression and why he is the way he is. That's what makes a good what if to me is, okay, so it's not just Superman being evil for the sake of being evil or Superman being a communist for the sake of being a communist. Well, why? Why is he like this? And how does he still retain some of what makes him him? What about you?
I really like Red Sun, actually. I think it is a great story. I think and part of why I think it works is because it's still Superman. He's still the same person at his core. It's just that difference of what if he landed in the Soviet Union as an infant instead of America. And that, to me, makes absolutely perfect sense. I mean, you could argue that the reason Superman in the old Golden Age and Silver Age, and to some extent even the Bronze Age, has this very American ethos is because that's how he was raised. He landed in America. He was raised in American patriotism. That same guy, if he was raised in the Soviet Union, would think that the Soviet Union was the best thing ever and would believe in the principles of Marxism through and through. And I think that's why it works so well as a comic. And you can see that he's not an evil person. Even when he becomes the absolute leader of the Soviet Union, he's not another Stalin. He is actually trying to create a society where everyone is safe, everyone is cared for, everyone is equal. I think it just worked phenomenally well. And how Lex Luthor is still a villain, still his villain, even from the American side. It's a great graphic novel. And it's one that I think, sadly, they butchered when they made an animated film of it. I think that animated adaptation was absolutely horrendous. But the comic is really good.
Ooh, so I don't know the number. David McDonald asked how many characters have gone from TV to comics instead of the other way around. This is a really interesting question because it's a symbiotic relationship. And then we also have radio in there because, not to keep harping on Superman, but so many of the things that are iconic about Superman came from the radio show. So the Daily Planet, Mind Pa Kent as we know them, because they were not nearly as much of a factor in the original Superman stories. Jimmy Olsen and Perry White also came from the radio show. And then when we're talking about jumping over to Batman, we've got Harley Quinn came from the animated series.
Yep.
And then, oh gosh, am I remembering right? Was Barbara Gordon from the 1966 Batman? Was Batgirl?
Barbara is interesting because it was kind of a both and. So she was in the comics first, but she was in the comics first because the creators of the TV show went to the comic book writers and said that they wanted to have a female Bat character and asked them at the comics to come up with one that then they could use in the TV show. Okay. So she did technically originate in the comics, but she was created in the comics at the prompting of the people working on the 60s TV show. And then she premiered in the TV show very soon after that in their third season.
So Creeley asks, Felicity Smoke was TV first, wasn't she? So actually, no. Felicity Smoke in name was in the comics, but she was the stepmom of one of the what is the oh my gosh. Okay, so
Oliver
she was
Queen?
No, she wasn't Oliver Queen.
Okay.
That would have been twisted.
It would have been twisty. Yeah. That seemed more twisty than Common and Kara. Okay.
The guys who share a brain, Firestorm.
Oh, yes, Firestorm. Okay.
One of the many characters who has been Firestorm, and I cannot remember what she was, stepmom of one of them. So they just threw that name in and put her in there, and she was only supposed to be like a few episodes, and then of course audiences fell in love with the actress and her chemistry with Stephen Amell. But so Felicity Smoke in name was in the comics, but was a completely different character, and that happened a few times with the Arrowverse.
Well, and other TV shows too. Mm-hmm. Like, you could make a very solid argument that without Batman the Animated Series, Mr. Freeze would not be the character that he is today, because he really was one of those characters that was created in the Silver Age to be this wacky villain like the Silver Age villains tend to be. And there really wasn't anything to him until the animated series created the new backstory with his wife and the tragedy and all of those things. So like you said, Kelly, these things have symbiotic relationships with each other. The TV and the comics and movies too feed back and forth into each other and influence as time goes on.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Same thing with Gambit and the 90s X-Men, because he was like just a two-dimensional character and then got really fleshed out. So let's get to Haley's question. Haley asks, do we know for certain the direct ancestors of comic books, Penny Dreadfuls, cartoons, etc.? Hollis, this is your wife asking a question that you know the answer to.
Okay, there you go. Thanks for making me look good, dear. Yeah, so technically, comic books, again, whenever you're trying to take a look at something from an academic standpoint, all my students are going to be familiar with what I'm about to say because I drill it into their heads like all the time. You have to start with a definition. What defines this thing? So Scott McCloud, in his seminal book, Understanding Comics, really set the definition for what a comic is. And he defined a comic as a sequence of juxtaposed images that create a story or an aesthetic experience. So if you start with that definition, comics have actually been around from the dawn of time, because you look at cave drawings. These are juxtaposed images that are telling you a story. You can see this in Egyptian hieroglyphics. You can see this in the Saint Chapelle Chapel with the stained glass that has all these different scenes from the Bible inside of it, telling you the story in progressive images. So technically, comics are probably the most ancient form of nonverbal storytelling that exists. They probably predate alphabets and written languages. Before those things existed, people were probably recording stories through comics in that pictorial justification. After that, when we start to get towards something we would actually recognize as comic books in the modern American sense, that's when you start to get into the late 1800s. And yes, they come from a couple different sources, like Haley's alluding to there. Political cartoons are one of the big sources of inspirations, because those have been going back since 1600s, of usually one panel though. But from there we get like conventions like the speech bubbles and the thought bubbles and the captioning. That's mostly coming from how those political cartoons evolved. But then you get multiple panels as we move into actual comics rather than just the political cartoons. And we also move away from strictly political subject matter. And the serialized nature of the comic book stories definitely owe a lot to the Penny Dreadfuls that Haley referenced there. So the Penny Dreadfuls were essentially the precursor to Pulp Fiction in the Victorian period, where you had these magazines that would print a new chapter of this long story that was going on sometimes for thousands of chapters, that were usually very exciting. They were full of fighting and gunshots and death and plot twists and all of that kind of stuff. They were a lot of fun. They were not deep at all. They were meant to be cheap entertainment. They were written very fast and usually with very bad prose, hence why they were called Penny Dreadfuls, because they were not well written most of the time. And that kind of storytelling eventually influenced the Pulp Fiction magazines in America in the 20s and 30s, which then in turn brought that same kind of storytelling sensibilities to the comic books. They did start in newspapers, and then eventually people realized that you could make a lot of money publishing magazines of just comics, and hence we get the comic book.
Crayley says, I thought the new woke crowd brought politics into comics. You are correct, Crayley. Politics being depicted with drawings and words is a brand new thing by those woke people. On that note, I'm gonna
Sarcasm,
roll
by the way, for anyone who didn't pick that up. Yep.
Absolute sarcasm. On that note, though, we are halfway to our goal of 1,500 for comic books for kids. Halfway there. I'm sorry, I've been singing. I can't carry a tune to save my life. To save you all from my singing. So we're at 752 of our $1,500 goal. I'm gonna roll tape of our spiel, and then we'll get back to the panel.
The Multiverse Fundraiser is partnering with Comic Books for Kids to raise money for their cause. Their mission is to provide comic books to children in hospitals and cancer centers across the United States, Canada, and the UK. We believe in the importance of providing stories that promote hope and bravery to kids who are facing things that are scarier than any supervillain. And we truly believe in this cause. To donate, you can either go to our Facebook page at www.facebook.com/The Multiverse Fundraiser or directly to comicbooksforkids.org.
As Crowley says, donate to make me stop singing. This is my third panel today. I'm tired. I'm wired. I will keep singing until you'll get us to 1,500 or beyond.
Yes, beyond would be definitely okay.
That is a threat. Or we'll keep answering questions. But keep donating. So Kelsey wants to know what makes a comic historically significant. I will let Professor Hollis take this one first.
So this is a tricky question because to some degree it's a little bit subjective. Because what is historically significant is going to depend on what your presuppositions are, how you define significant, that sort of thing. But generally speaking, I'll go by brass tacks, which is the comic books that are historically significant tend to be the comics that people actually want, i.e. are worth money. So the comic books that are worth a whole lot of money on the collector's market tend to be the ones that are either really, really old, but not just really old, but also have made some kind of cultural impact. So a lot of times it's the first appearances of characters. So for instance, Action Comics #1 used to be the most valuable comic book in the world because it was the first appearance of Superman, who is, I don't think, a stretch to say the most culturally significant character to come out of comic books, first among many. First appearance of Batman, Detective Comics 27, also crazy valuable. We're talking multi-millions if you've got a good condition. But it's also comics later on that had something that happened in the storyline that connected with history in a really significant way. So, for instance, two comics I actually do have are the infamous drug issues of The Amazing Spider-Man. So this is when Stan Lee did a storyline where Harry Osborn, Peter's best friend, is revealed to be addicted to LSD and dropping acid all the time and having these really intense hallucinogenic episodes and just really, really bad stuff. Stan Lee meant that to be a warning against dropping acid, against using LSD. But as Kelly and I have talked about, at the time, the Comics Code Authority would not allow you to depict drug use at all, even if it was in a negative fashion. So Marvel did something really brave, and they published those issues without the Comics Code Authority. So those issues are missing the Comics Code Authority seal. And because of that, they are deemed historically important and also worth money because of that whole controversy. Similar thing would be characters that have just blown up in importance to people. So even though Harley Quinn didn't first appear in the comics, the comic book where they did introduce her for the first time is worth a lot of money, is considered really valuable. I would also say like the introduction of Spider-Gwen is super valuable. as was when they killed Gwen Stacy back in the old days with the comic that launched the Bronze Age. Anything that either connects to history or has been a long-term game changer for a particularly beloved character are going to be considered historically significant.
I would also say anything that shifts the industry in any way. So, like Watchmen shifted the industry because it basically created this thirst for darker, grittier superhero stories. Something like that. Or again, the death of Gwen Stacy shifted the industry because it showed people that, yes, there is a market for stories where the hero loses and where characters die, for better or for worse, which we also discussed. And as Clearly mentioned, some comics are also really historically significant within certain niches of the population and fandom, like Mia Dearden. So those may not be as historically significant on a broader scale, but like within the DC and especially the Green Arrow fandom, these are huge. We love Mia Dearden.
Yeah. And I should point out that certain artists as well who are particularly amazing in terms of their talent and who have been influential in the sense of leaving a impression on other artists that you can tell other artists grew and developed because of them. Those are also significant things. So for instance, when Todd McFarlane took over Spider-Man, those, not just his first issue, but frankly, every issue in his run is considered really significant because of how it influenced other comic book artists. I would make an argument that, I can't remember his last name, but Darwin Wayne, I believe it was, Darwin Cook. There we go. Thank you. He also was one of those, a more recent one than McFarlane, who really made a huge impact on the comic book industry. Like when he took over the Catwoman series and he redesigned the Catwoman costume, that costume that he created has become basically the definitive Catwoman look, at least in the comic books, which before then there really was no definitive Catwoman look because artists changed the costume so much, so frequently.
Right. Yeah, and then events like Crisis on Infinite Earths that just rebooted all of DC and kind of set off that standard for DC of rebooting every 15 years or so.
Yeah.
For better or for worse. This is a great question. I'm going to be selfish and answer first.
Go ahead.
Sorry. Creeley asks, what do you think separates comics from fairy tales? So first of all, I think there's a lot in common with comics and fairy tales because they're both morality stories and they both have fantastic powers. But I think the biggest thing is that fairy tales have a beginning, middle, and end, and comics are serialized. So comics are more like the mythology of Greek gods where you just keep adding on to the story. What would you say separates comics from fairy tales?
That's a really interesting question. I think part of it is the specific themes that superhero stories are interested. There is a lot of overlap. Like you said, the fundamental concern with morality is the same. I would say that fairy tales, though they often feature heroes, are not as hero-centric as most comics are. There are a certain number of heroic characters in fairy tales like Jack the Giant Slayer. I would argue that some of the prince characters are and aren't, depends on the story. So where the prince actually has to fight somebody, I would say that's more of a hero. When I would also controversially, I argue in my upcoming book on Little Red Riding Hood that Little Red is also a heroic character in her own right, at least when she's done well. The other thing I would say is a big difference is, like you said, that fairy tales don't tend to have sequels. Like Cinderella gets married at the end and that's the end. She lived happily ever after. There's no other story with Cinderella. Whereas your comparison to the mythology, I think, was very, very appropriate because the superheroes do keep getting added and added and added and added, and there comes to be a canon eventually where there's eventually the solidity of what they decide did actually count and what didn't count and what is true and is not true about these characters. But it is this still evolving thing. Whereas fairy tales just keep getting the same story retold again and again and again through different generations infused with different meanings. But I will say there is an element of that in superhero media as well, because there are certain stories, like the origin stories, for instance, that do keep getting retold again and again and again in different mediums and over different time periods. So those are the main overlaps I can think of. I also thought it was really interesting. I don't know if you and Crayley have read these, but Marvel went through a phase where it did these. Yes,
Batman and
Crayley,
those dang
exactly.
pearls. Okay, we need to talk about this.
Over and over and over again.
Pearl necklaces don't break like that. They're knotted in between the pearls, especially rich people pearl necklaces. If I never see another pearl necklace break on screen, because that's not even just a Batman thing. Okay.
Yep.
I'm done. For now.
But I will say real fast, there was this line of like Spider-Man fairy tales, X-Men fairy tales that Marvel did back in the early 2000s.
Yeah, I remember those.
Where they tried to like take these classic fairy tales and insert the Marvel characters as the different characters. The one that stands out to me the most was actually they did a Little Red Riding Hood Spider-Man one where Mary Jane was Little Red and Peter was like the woodcutter. So yeah, there are definitely some thematic overlap.
That's funny because I'm doing a series of drawings where I redesign DC superheroines as Disney princesses, and Curly and I are going to cosplay some of them. And I'm having a lot of fun playing with the thematic elements. So I made Black Canary the Little Mermaid because making Mira the Little Mermaid was too on the nose. And I figured like Black Canaries, Canary Cry, Siren.
Oh, interesting.
That was I'm trying to make connections like that aren't like just this character has blonde hair, so I'm going to put her in. So I'm having fun with it.
Cool.
I need to get back to that, but Kelsey's got some good questions. She needs like all
Kelsey.
the good. Kelsey, I'm giving you an A. I don't have the power to do that, but you get an A for me for the day. I am not a professor. Little asterisk. But Kelsey asks, what caused the comic book market crash of the 1990s? The death of Superman. Not
in
exactly.
Part, yeah.
But okay, so we're talking. You asked that question about historically significant comic books. One of the things people did back in the 90s was the comic book collector market was out of control. People were like, it was getting out of control because people were like, okay, all these old comics I have from the 60s and like before that are worth a lot of money. So I'm going to try to speculate on what's going to be worth a lot of money. And the death of Superman happened in the mid 90s. And people were like, well, I'm just going to buy up a ton of these comics because it's going to be worth a lot of money someday. Well, what happens when a company prints a ton of comics and every sucker out there buys them thinking, oh, it's going to be worth a lot of money? Beanie Babies. Same thing as Beanie Babies. And so people are trying to buy comics based on what they thought they were worth. And then eventually people just got sick of that because there's no joy in that. It was more complicated than that, but also rising printing costs. And then I'm sorry if I'm talking over too much, but then there was a whole thing where, so in the 90s, a lot of comic creators got really fed up with things at DC and Marvel. And so there's a big clash there, and they went off and did their own thing. And so there was just like a lot of creative angst going on. And I think that they just lost a lot of readers because of that.
Marvel in particular was really heinous, and they lost all of their all-stars, right? They lost McFarlane, and all these people went off, and a lot of them actually formed Image Comics at the end of the 90s. And yeah, it was just not a good time. And you're right about the death of Superman being the biggest one, but the comic book industry also kept doing things like that. Like, for instance, Uncanny X-Men had been going on forever, but then they launched another series called just X-Men and made X-Men issue 1. And then they did a bunch of variant covers for X-Men issue 1 to try to get people to think this was going to be an important comic book someday, because it was an issue 1 and all these variant covers. And you're right, people bought them all up, not because they were reading them, but because they thought it was an investment, and it just wasn't actually a good investment. And then when people realized that, they stopped reading comics, and it contributed to the bankruptcy of Marvel and some other things.
I like Curly's comment. Why is she so obsessed with Superman? You know what? Because Superman's awesome.
Oh.
And Curly asks, is that why Batman and Superman were the only main popular supers in the 90s? Because of the Marvel talent purge? Honestly, I think it's because, well, first of all, Marvel declared bankruptcy in, I think, was it the early 90s? It
was late 90s. Late 90s.
It was after that talent purge. So
that's right. I think that was one of the last straws for Marvel before they lost it. Yeah.
So it was partly Marvel declaring bankruptcy, and they sold off their movie rights. It was partly Batman and Superman both had thriving animated series, so they had that recognizability and the toy sales. So it's really hard to justify spending, especially back then when effects were so expensive. It's really hard to justify to studios spending a ton of money on a movie, if a blockbuster movie like that, if you're not going to get toy sales. So you can already point to the animated series going, look, we're already selling toys. It's a no-brainer.
I also want to point out, though, that Batman and Superman weren't the only ones, because even though Marvel went bankrupt, Spider-Man was still incredibly popular in the 90s and was doing really well. And the X-Men as well were super, super, super big deal with their animated series in the late 90s. But the thing was, that was at the end, Marvel, I think, really trying to bank hard on their most popular franchises in these other mediums, because comics weren't doing it for them anymore, and they were having bankruptcy issues. And you got to remember, like, the universal island of Marvel superheroes was at the end of the 90s. Now, Marvel was, again, trying to save itself through doing this, but Spider-Man and the X-Men were popular enough to merit this universal investing in the amusement park.
And if you all have never been, it was pretty cool, at least last time I went, but that was a long time ago. I don't know what it's like now.
It's apparently like a time capsule, because it's exactly how it has always been since the 90s.
So Crayley says, the way I remember it, Superman and Batman were mainstream, and the X-Men was for nerds, with Spider-Man
maybe
as a bit of an exception. You know what? That's possible. And
I will say, sorry.
I was going to say, well, so them selling off the movie rights, and then when the live action movies came, that changed everything.
It did. But it also changed the perception. Maybe that's true as well, because in the 90s, for instance, Rogue from the X-Men was probably Marvel's second most popular character, just right under Spider-Man. And even though that was true, she didn't necessarily break into the mainstream consciousness of larger pop culture. So Crayley may very well have a point there.
She wasn't as easily packageable to children because well, first of all, she's a girl, and they weren't selling girl heroes because girls don't like superheroes. We all know this.
Totally. Kelly is only here because she's being paid.
You guys are getting paid? Yeah, and also her power set is a little harder to explain to kids, and she's a bombshell, so parents don't like sexy characters. It's gross, but so Kelsey asks, how did British comics influence American writers during the 1980s? So I don't know as much about British comics. What do you know about British comics, Hollis?
They weren't ever as successful as the American comics. So essentially what happened with British comics is more or less the American comics got imported to England, like the Marvel and the DC and whatnot. They started to like reprint them in England in slightly different formats. So it happened in like a larger waves in the 70s and 80s. So after Marvel and DC had already been writing stories for years, the British comics would publish things that were a lot thicker because they were collecting multiple stories of those characters into one issue. And then what did eventually happen, though, pretty quickly was there was also inspiration from local British talent to do new stories of those characters for those issues. So you'd have like reprints of the American stories alongside new stories by those British writers. But then I would say the biggest lasting contribution is the people from the UK that Marvel and DC in America more or less took to then work in the US. Alan Moore is from the UK, right? There's a couple other big names. I can't remember off the top of my head. Grant Morrison, I think, may have come from the UK,
yes,
but I can't. Yeah, there you go.
He's from Scotland, but don't quote me on that. Grant Morrison, if you're out there listening, I'm sorry if I got your country wrong.
There we go. Yep.
As Ted Lasso asked, how many countries are in this country?
There you go. Exactly. And I think the illustrator for The Killing Joke also came from the UK, but I can't remember his name right now. But yeah, and those guys, interestingly, tended to be some of the all-stars of the comic book industry, at least considered to be by the fan base. So that's, I think, the biggest contribution of British comics is actually not the comics themselves, but the writers and artists that they produced, who then moved over to America and did stuff for the American comics.
British creators probably just brought a new voice and energy, and having not grown up with American comics in quite the same way. So that's interesting, though. I like David's question. So David asked, how have the darker comics of the 80s influenced modern comics? Whew.
They've ruined them. No, kidding, not kidding. I think I personally have a slightly different opinion on that than a lot of other people. So I do think it was good that the code lightened up as we get into the mid 70s and into the 80s, where you could do more, like you don't have to have the bad guy lose in every single story. You don't have to portray policemen and politicians and military people as 100% morally great people who never do anything wrong whatsoever. That was a good change. And I do think that superheroes do not have to just be for kids. There is really meaningful stories that can be told for adults with superheroes. And the 80s really showed that with things like The Dark Knight Returns with Frank Miller, and things like, I'd even say, The Night That Gwen Stacy Died, the Green Lantern, Green Arrow series, all those sorts of things. And I think those were good things, and I'm glad that they exist. I think that what has happened in the modern comic book world, like post the 90s, is those comics are so well loved and sold and continue to sell in reprinted editions so well that the industry has just gone whole hog on every superhero story has to be dark and gritty, has to not just have adult themes, but adult content in terms of violence and sexuality and all that kind of stuff. And that, I think, is a problem, because I think when you go so hard on that you don't do anything else, then it becomes problematic, especially in a space where the majority of the population who are still interested in superheroes are kids still. Not that you are a child if you're into superheroes as an adult, not that you are some kind of psychologically harmed, developmentally arrested individual. But
Oh, I am.
Oh, Kelly. But the primary audience is still kids. And I think the sad thing is the way the comic book companies work right now, comic book stores are not safe places for kids, sadly, because the main people they're catering to are those very dark, very adult kind of storylines.
That's a good point. Curly had to ask in her Regina George voice, why are you so obsessed with the 80s? Because that's when we were born. It was also a pivotal moment in the comics industry. So I would say, so the Silver Age, of course, had the comics code that just restricted things like crazy. And then, like you said, it lightened up in the 70s and 80s. I would say I think the pendulum is starting to swing back. So I am seeing a lot more titles that are kid friendly, which makes me happy. And every comic shop I've gone to, and that's not saying that's the experience everywhere, but every comic shop I've gone to has a pretty good kid section, which makes me happy. So kudos to all the local comic shops that do curate that. Most of them try to have that section right out front, which also is good to have it really visible. So when kids walk in, that's what they're greeted with. So families aren't like having to search for what's safe for their kids and like it's clearly labeled, because it is hard to navigate that, especially if your kid loves superheroes and you're taking them into a shop for the first time. You want to be able to find something safe for them.
Yeah.
So,
and I do want to shout out in that area Excalibur, which is the comic book store in Texarkana, who also hung up a poster for us for the Multiverse fundraiser. So that's awesome. Thank you so much. They do also do a good job of making sure that the adult comics kind of stay out of reach of kids. They actually do that quite literally. So the rack is that the kids' comics are the lowest to the ground and the more mature ones are higher up. So they are also making a concerted effort to make that happen.
Good. Well, kudos to the shops that take those extra steps. And I've also, in my time as a comic reader, because shops used to not be as friendly to female readers, but most shops I go, or actually, I've never had a bad experience. And I've heard horror stories from female readers, but I've never had a bad experience. I've always been welcomed. The shop I go to mainly now has women working at it, which is nice. So I think comic shops have come a long way. There's still more, there's always more improvements that can be made. But
yeah,
as Crayley said, new kids franchise, also new kids franchises have branched into comics like Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is great. Yeah. And then someone we interviewed last year, Mike Mayhack, does a lot of great kids books, and he's been doing some work for both DC and Marvel. And so that's someone to look for if you're in your local comic shop and you don't know who to look for. His work is really cute.
It is. He's a very talented artist and storyteller because he writes too. That's a rare combination. Yeah, he's very cool.
He's so great. But I have noticed that there are more stories out there that are trying, even those that appeal to adults. I've noticed more stories that are just fun and not the grim dark. And there is always going to be a market for the gritty stories, but like you, I like escapists. I like escapism. I want something that's going to make me feel happy and hopeful. And reading Watchmen,
as opposed to depressed and sad, right?
Yeah.
Oh, Watchmen. Yeah, I personally, some people are going to want to hurt me for saying this, but I do think Watchmen is overrated. personally speaking. Not to say that it doesn't have moments of absolute brilliance in it, but I think that just the idea of tearing apart the superhero isn't actually, at least for me, is not something I particularly think is all that deep.
Ooh, Kelsey.
Kelsey, why?
How might AI and digital tools influence the future of comics? It is putting people out of work right now, and there's a lot of ethical questions. My hope is that AI data centers will find a safer way to power things that isn't going to drain our water reserves, and a more ethical way to source their art so that artists can consent, because unfortunately AI isn't necessarily going anywhere. So we need to find an ethical way to use the technology. Hollis, I'm going to bring Mark in.
Sounds good.
Do you want to say your piece on AI, or did I say?
Oh, no. Everyone is already aware of what I think about AI. So no need for me to take up time talking about that.
Hey guys.
Welcome, Mark.
Hey, this is an AI avatar, and I just wanted to say hello to everybody. Hello to everybody. Hello to every. Oh wait.
Get out of here if you're AI.
Get out of here.
No.
Listen, Hollis, I hadn't had a chance to say hello to you. It's been a year, and I just want to say thanks, bud. Appreciate you being on.
Thank you, Mark. It's good to see you again.
It's good to be seen. You guys should do this more often, because I freaking loved listening to the history.
Thank you.
You know, you talked about Catwoman at one point earlier on, and we did a villains cover, which I don't have. Last year we did this cover, which Jerry Ordway did. Ooh. So the new one, I don't have it with me, is the villains cover. And when he did it, I said to Jerry, we need Catwoman. And he said, which version of Catwoman? And I said, the red pink suit. And that was what Jerry did, right? But there had been so many different versions of Catwoman. And then I think I love the comment as well as difference between Crayley asked the difference between fairy tales and comics. I was waiting for Kelly for you to say, well, fairy tales have a beginning, middle, and end. Comics never have an ending.
Never.
Well,
Mark, yeah. You know that Hollis and I have a comic and U.S. history podcast, so we do this more often. I'll send you the link. We have a whole Catwoman episode.
Say that again for those who may have not caught that.
So it's called ComicStory, and we it's audio only, so you can listen to it in the car or wherever. And we have a whole Catwoman episode. Well, okay. I used it to talk about Hedy Lamarr also, because Hedy Lamarr
was an inspiration.
Was one of the visual inspirations for Catwoman.
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Well, I'm just an AI avatar, and I can't comment in any way about you, but thank you. And I will respond with something AI appropriate. Wow.
Just wait for the algorithm to program you.
Wow, that's great. Hollis, great to see you. Kelly, awesome as always. Love what you guys continue to do for our organization, and thrilled to consider you a part of our organization, if I may be so bold.
You may.
We couldn't do it without the great support of people who have the passion that you all have and demonstrate clearly in these calls. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you for stopping in. We are at the halfway point. We've raised $752 so far. So
incredible. I'll let you guys go. I will be popping in as I do, and so thanks for everything you guys do.
That sounds good.
Bye-bye.
Well, yeah, we have 2 minutes left. I just want to give a plug for, we're going to have an hour break, and then after that, we are going to have your audio drama. Do you want to tell people a little bit what they should expect with that?
They should expect a live radio show. So we're doing it all live in real time, just like they did back in the 20s and 30s. So if anyone messes up, we're going to go with it. I've told the actors, stay in character. Even if the aliens come down, just make it work and keep it going. So it's going to be fun. It is an amazing cast. We've got Chris Jowers. We've got Lauren. We've got all kinds of people familiar to the Phoenix Sisters Entertainment Network and some new folks, too, that aren't so familiar. People like Dustin Tayo, who's the narrator. It's phenomenal work. I have had a blast working with that whole cast, and I'm really excited to get the show out there and everyone do it. It's going to be a fun, action-packed Batman story, but also, I hope, a little bit deeper as well. That might have some deep themes that will surprise you about trauma and guilt and how those things can be manipulated by certain people. So I think that it will be a fun show.
I'm so excited. So you all have an hour to make your donations, get your snacks ready, and
That's
meet
right.
us back here. Hollis, thank you for joining me. Everyone, right now, Comic Story is it's on a hiatus, but you can find it on Spotify or whatever your audio podcast app of choice is. We will be notifying you on the Phoenix Sisters Entertainment social media when we start posting episodes again. In the meantime, go get caught up on season 1 because we have a whole backlog for you to get caught up on. We've got some fun episodes there. Thank you all for joining us. And we'll see you in an hour for that audio drama.
See you then. Thank you, Kelly.
Thanks.
The Multiverse Fundraiser is partnering with Comic Books for Kids to raise money for their cause. Their mission is to provide comic books to children in hospitals and cancer centers across the United States, Canada, and the UK. We believe in the importance of providing stories that promote hope and bravery to kids who are facing things that are scarier than any supervillain. And we truly believe in this cause. To donate, you can either go to our Facebook page at www.facebook.com/The Multiverse Fundraiser or directly to comicbooksforkids.org.
The Multiverse Fundraiser would like to thank our sponsors: Earth Dog Studios, Clobberin Comics, The Art of Brian Rodman, Studio Moonfall, Elusive Comics, and of course, the Phoenix Sisters Entertainment Network for hosting this event. Learn how to support these businesses on the MVFR website.